I'm the CEO of a company, but I didn't watch the janitor screw my wife, who is now pregnant by a beggar. Be me, 32-year-old Jason. Successful as fuck. Working management in big company. Making over $35K a month. Not bullshitting. Really felt like I had it all. Thought I was in control of everything. Life was ordered. AF. Had it all. Loving family, gym routine, regular travel, business meetings. Felt stable and confident. Been with wife Emily for over 20 years. Thought our family was rock solid. 2 kids, Jake and Sarah, off at fancy colleges. Finally had more freedom for just me and Emily. While I built my career, Emily was stay-at-home mom. She still had her hobbies and passions, though. We had everything an American my age could dream of. Big house in good area. Staff. Stable income. Bright future. At the peak of all this stability, couldn't even imagine how an unexpected betrayal would fuck everything up. Sometimes you're so caught up in external achievements, you miss the little things destroying what you've built over years. Didn't know then that the first warning sign came way earlier than I noticed. Looking back now, I see all the cracks in our family growing wider. If I'd noticed earlier, maybe everything would have ended differently. Especially her relationship with the house staff. Always wary of how she interacted with them, especially the janitor. Brushed off my suspicions though. Thought it was just fatigue or busy work schedule. So absorbed in my career, didn't notice the obvious. Emily, turns out, was a pro at hiding shit behind everyday life. Should mention that work was always more than just a paycheck for me. Running a company needs strategic thinking, discipline, attention to detail. Proud of my high position and stable income. Every day scheduled down to the minute. From meetings with top managers to new business plans. Had its own harmony. Liked this life despite the downsides. Everything fit my expectations. Clear structure. Knew I could handle any challenges. But every day noticed more how this stability was crumbling outside the office. Emily seemed to become more distant. Our rare conversations were cold and formal. Sometimes felt like we were just neighbors. 2 people who happened to be in the same house but nothing else in common. At first, chalked it up to workload. My job took up a lot of time, obviously. Company was in the process of acquiring a new one. I was responsible for integrating all processes. Emily and I talked about how this was temporary. Once this project was done, I'd have more family time. Promised myself it was just a phase. Thought everything would go back to normal, but it never happened. What was happening under my nose went unnoticed for too long. As expected, Emily started looking for her own interests. Spent more time with friends or small projects. Never really interested her before. Might have seemed normal except for one thing. Her weird behavior with the house staff, especially the janitor. Started noticing their relationship went beyond normal work stuff. Every time I passed by, they'd suddenly shut up, like they were interrupting something important. Her gaze, her demeanor around him all seemed suspicious. Tried not to dwell on it. Convinced myself it was just my paranoia. We'd been together so many years. If something was wrong, I would have noticed, right? Seemed absurd at first. Even though he looked like a good candidate for a lover, bit younger than me, in good shape. Couldn't think about such a thing? Seemed crazy, but all this anxiety gradually built up. Felt our communication had become not just cold, but almost hostile. In rare moments when we discussed important stuff, Emily seemed to avoid direct answers. Tried to start a conversation about what was bothering us. She just brushed it off. She insisted everything was fine. Said I was working too much and just pushing myself. Wanted to believe her. Wanted to regain that feeling of security we had before. But something inside didn't give me peace. Especially since I brought up the issue of keeping a janitor several times. Other contractors were doing most of the maintenance work. To my surprise, Emily reacted sharply every time. Claimed he was irreplaceable. Said he did everything others couldn't do. Listened to her arguments. Couldn't understand why she defended him so stubbornly. Something wrong about this. But couldn't put my finger on what. Maybe I was too busy with work to really realize the magnitude of what was happening. That's exactly what I decided. Thought I was overheated due to constant stress. Days spent in endless negotiations and meetings. Returned home late. Morning began again with work calls. Whole life focused on achieving new career heights. Family gradually faded into background. Believed I could make things right once this stressful phase passed. Believed Emily and I still had a chance to get back what we lost. Now, looking back, I understand it was an illusion. Too engrossed in my work to notice the obvious. Wall between us grew higher and higher. Instead of destroying it, only strengthened it with my inaction. Lost control of the situation. Then everything began to fall apart like a house of cards. What I thought was a temporary problem turned out to be the beginning of the end. Little did I know I was already on the verge of the most painful discoveries of my life. When Emily and I discussed future plans, one of our main desires was to travel. Dreamed of going to Europe for ages, living in ancient cities, enjoying freedom from worries and bustle. Supposed to be time for just the 2 of us. Time when work and problems would fade into background. Hoped we'd feel close again. In the past, trips like this always brought us closer, took us back to when we first started our life together. Hoped this trip would be the turning point. Thought it'd bring us back to our former closeness. Booked the tickets. Calculated the schedule so my work would be minimal those weeks. But as often happens, life made its own adjustments. Shortly before the holidays, my company decided to acquire another company. Huge deal. Future of our business depended on it. As a leader, couldn't afford to take a vacation. Millions of dollars and hundreds of jobs at stake. Tried to convince myself it was temporary. Thought I could make things right after the deal. But deep down knew I'd failed Emily. Once again put my work above family. Most likely this was predetermined by fate. Had to happen for my own good. She reacted more calmly than I expected. Maybe she'd long since accepted my work priorities. Or maybe she just didn't care anymore. Saw that shadow of disappointment in her eyes though. Same look when I canceled family plans because of work before. We agreed she'd go on the trip alone. I'd join her later as soon as I was free. Was confident I could make up for lost time. While she was away, house seemed unusually empty. Kids left for college long ago. Not news to me. But for first time in ages, felt truly alone. Work I valued so much couldn't fill the emptiness in my heart. Came home after long hours at the office. Found no consolation in anything. Not TV, not books, not even occasional calls from my kids. House, once filled with life, now seemed cold and lifeless. Silence in the rooms, broken only by air conditioner noise and occasional staff steps. Cleaners came and went. Cook prepared food. I often didn't have time to eat. Everything organized to smallest detail, but feeling of chaos growing inside me. Emily called every day from the trip. Told me how much she liked new places, people, culture. Her voice sounded light and carefree, as if she found the freedom she'd been missing for so long. Tried to be happy for her, but something in her tone made me anxious. Seemed to enjoy this freedom too much. Like this journey gave her something I couldn't. Told myself it was just work fatigue. That after the deal, everything would get better. We could be a family again. But as days passed, my anxiety only grew. Found myself thinking more about her words. How she talked about new acquaintances and impressions. Seemed she distanced herself from me not just physically, but emotionally. Couldn't understand when it started. When Emily returned from her trip, expected her to be happy to be home. But her behavior was strange. Seemed relaxed and calm. But no longer that warmth in her eyes from before. We hardly spoke. Her account of the trip was dry and restrained. Like a report she was obliged to give me. No joy, no intimacy. Something new in her gaze I couldn't understand. Something that kept her away from me. Couldn't get time off for vacation and that was my failure. Tried to justify myself, my career, but understood this was just another step towards our alienation. When she went to her room, left alone in the living room, surrounded by silence and thoughts, thought about how we became so distant. What did I do wrong? Or maybe the problem wasn't just me. This kind of thing haunted me, realized I had to figure it out. Despite desire to sort out situation and return to same communication with wife. As several days passed, began to become increasingly immersed in work. Looking at myself then, can now say with confidence, was trying to escape from feelings that haunted me at home. But the more I worked, the stronger they became. Seemed an insurmountable wall had grown between me and Emily. Every day it only became higher. Even when we were close, felt like we were speaking different languages. Tried to remember last time we laughed together. When we felt truly happy, these memories seemed too distant, as if they belonged to another life, another time. So immersed in my thoughts, didn't notice real changes had begun. One evening when I returned from work, felt strange tension in the house. Emily was sitting in kitchen with janitor, their conversation too animated for normal work discussions. As soon as I entered room, they fell silent. At that moment realized my anxiety wasn't just figment of my imagination. After that evening with janitor, my suspicions began to grow with renewed vigor. Previously, could attribute this to imagination, exhaustion from work, or lack of sleep. Now becoming increasingly difficult to ignore what was happening. Constantly caught Emily at these strange moments. She'd either discuss something too animatedly with him, or suddenly fall silent when I appeared. Every time I approached, their conversation seemed to disappear. Left behind feeling of unsaidness, wondered what was really going on. Emily still claimed janitor was irreplaceable person, but deep down knew his work and house was nothing more than formality. Bulk of tasks at site performed by visiting workers. They appeared twice a month. This guy could easily be out of work and no one would notice but her. Began to monitor his appearance in house more closely. He was always here, too often, too involved in what was happening. Spent most of my time at work. But every time I returned home, he was at station or discussing something with Emily. Perhaps these would still just be passing thoughts. If it weren't for Emily's own reaction, every time I brought up issue of his presence, her response too emotional for such simple question, brushed it off as if it didn't matter. Defended him as if there was more at stake than simply fulfilling his duties. Couldn't understand it. More I tried to figure it out, more she pulled away from me. Seemed every conversation about him became small battle. I always came out the loser. Our life gradually began to turn into game of hide and seek. Tried to catch moment when she'd make mistake, when she wouldn't be able to hide her sympathy or affection for him. But Emily was careful, and this irritated me even more. Couldn't believe my wife of 20 years was hiding something so obvious from me. Be me cleaning the attic one day, place I couldn't trust to our cleaners. Closed off because of valuable memories stored there. Accidentally stumble upon Emily's old school album. Can't remember last time I saw it. Didn't think it was anything important. Flip through pages, feeling nostalgic. Remember how Emily used to talk passionately about her school days. Suddenly, my eyes catch a particular photograph. It's Emily's graduation photo with her classmates. Looks ordinary at first glance, but one face catches my attention. Can't immediately place why it seems so familiar. After a few moments, it hits me. It's him, the same janitor Emily's been spending so much time with. He's younger in the photo, but the face is unmistakable. My heart sinks. They've known each other for a long time. How long has she been lying to me? How long have they really known each other? Try to calm myself down at first. Think maybe she's just supporting an old friend. Couldn't talk about it openly for some reason. It's not like I'm interested in sponsoring some random guy. That's not the issue at all. Realize their conversations aren't just reminiscing about old times. There are emotions there, something connecting them. At that moment, I know I have to find out what's really going on behind my back. My worst suspicions start to feel confirmed. Holding this album in my hands, feel like my whole world is turning upside down. With each page, my mind sinks deeper into unpleasant guesses. Questions keep flooding my already troubled mind. Was there always something more to their relationship? Try to push these thoughts away, but they've already taken root. Realize this isn't just some casual acquaintance. He was important to her long before he showed up at our house. This album opens doors to her past. I thought I knew everything about. Turns out I was missing some pretty important details. Everything I thought I knew about our life together seems like an illusion now. How long have I been living this lie? Start to suspect their story began way earlier than I ever imagined. What if my entire life with Emily has been built on lies? Everything changes from that moment. Can't look at Emily the same way anymore. Her every move, every glance, it all irritates me now, fills me with distrust. We're still living under the same roof, but whatever connected us before is gone. Feel like a stranger in my own home, like I'm watching a play where all the roles were assigned long ago, and I'm just the audience. Know I have to do something now, not for her, but for myself and our kids. Can't keep living in the shadow of this deception. From that day on, start planning my next move. Gotta make sure her huge, vile lie doesn't destroy our family life forever. After seeing that photo, my whole world turns upside down. All my faith in our marriage, in Emily, it all collapses like a house of cards. Can't see her the same way anymore. Start looking at every moment we've spent together in a new light. See hidden meanings in every gesture, every word of hers now. Meanings far from what I used to see. Can't keep this information bottled up for long. Everything I've seen and felt, it's like poison inside me. Realize I can't keep pretending nothing's happened. For the first time in ages, decide to face reality. Stop ignoring what's right in front of me. Even fake a sick leave document to get some time off work for health reasons. This time, can't put work first. My family's at stake. Gotta put those burning business issues on hold. First thing I do, try to confirm my suspicions. Start paying more attention to how she acts, how she interacts with the janitor. Now that I know they go way back, everything's clearer. See how she looks at him, how she talks to him. Her every move confirms my worst fears. See that sparkle in her eyes? The one she used to have when we first met. The betrayal seems obvious now, even if I don't know all the details. But I'm not rushing into anything. Want to be 100% sure before I do anything drastic? Days drag by slowly. Every move she makes seems calculated. Like she knows I'm onto something. Feels like we're playing some twisted game. Who'll catch who first? Try my best to stay calm, but something inside me is cracking under the pressure. One day, decide to take it a step further. Want to dig deeper? Figure out just how far this thing with the janitor goes. Decide to check her phone. Emily always leaves it on the kitchen table or in the bedroom, like she's got nothing to hide. This lack of caution sets off alarm bells. Either she's sure I won't notice anything, or this thing with him is so well thought out, she's not scared of me finding out. One day, when Emily's at the store, I make my move. Grab her phone. My hands are shaking a bit, but I steel myself and start looking for anything suspicious. At first glance, nothing stands out. Just chats with friends, boring messages, regular calls. Almost give up. Then I spot a contact with a name I don't recognize. It's clearly a fake name. Not hard to guess, it's the janitor. Message history's short, but it tells me everything I need to know. They've met up at cafes a few times when I was at work. Normal sounding messages, but with a subtext that cuts deep. Realized these weren't just casual meetups. Something inside me just snaps. Now I've got no doubts. Holding the phone, feeling the anger and hurt wash over me. Everything I've been trying to ignore comes flooding out. Emily betrayed me. She's wrecked our marriage. That janitor in my house. He's become a symbol of everything that's gone wrong in my life. In that moment, realize I can't take it anymore. Not gonna just roll over and accept this. Everything I've done for our family, all the years I've put into this marriage, now it's all worthless. But even in this low moment, tell myself it's not over. Start thinking about how I can get back at them. How to end this thing in a way that'll hurt not just me and the kids, but teach those two a serious lesson. All sorts of scenarios start playing in my head. Want to make sure my revenge is as cold as her betrayal. Don't know when or how it'll happen, but I'm dead set on making them both pay for what they've done. Emily's trashed our family, destroyed everything I've built, and she's gonna have to answer for it. I'm not usually one for gambling, but right now, feel like I've finally been dealt a winning hand. All that's left is to play my cards right and win this twisted game. After I saw Emily's correspondence with the janitor, mind finally tuned to one thing. Had to take revenge. My life, which seemed so secure and stable, suddenly collapsed. Felt like couldn't just move on as if nothing happened. Resentment, pain, and disappointment began to degenerate into cold-blooded calculation. Revenge became my only goal. Realized had to act carefully, so Emily and her lover wouldn't suspect anything. This shouldn't be an emotional outburst, but a carefully thought-out plan. A real blow to them. This was all me, cool and methodical. Same as at work, when involved in large projects. Managing hundreds of people and millions of dollars, but now the stakes were much higher. My revenge had to be such that they both felt their world was collapsing, just as mine had collapsed. First step was to start collecting information. If wanted everything to go perfectly, needed details. To find out a lot more about who this person was, where he came from in her life, why I was only able to get to this deception now. Didn't just want emotional revenge, needed to destroy their lives as methodically as they destroyed mine. The janitor, who at first glance seemed like an ordinary person, turned out to be a much more important figure than I could have imagined. After several weeks of observing and studying his behavior, decided to go ahead and find out more about his past. My suspicions that his relationship with Emily was not a coincidence were confirmed. Hired a private investigator to find out everything he could about him. Few days later, detective told me something shocking. This man was not just her lover. He was her friend from her youth. The same guy with whom she had an affair before we even met. They had broken up long before I came into her life, but now obvious that their relationship had never truly ended. He always remained in her life, even if I didn't know about it. This information made the situation even more painful. She lied to me not only about her infidelity, but also about a past that was always there, hidden from my eyes. Felt like my life had become a theater, where I was nothing more than a spectator, and she played the main role, deceiving me all these years. Now knew that my revenge had to be even more ruthless. Continued to live as if nothing had happened. Was the same caring husband, came home, had dinner with Emily, talked to the children on the phone. But an icy determination grew inside me. Had already started planning my next step. It had to be precise, so that they both felt that everything they had collapsed. Just as quickly as it had collapsed for me, began to gradually move away from Emily, as if creating a distance that she could not explain. Was less available, spent more time in the office. When I was at home, showed indifference to her attempts to maintain illusion of normal life. This was all part of my plan. Wanted her to feel that something was changing, but she did not understand what it was. At that time, began to think about how best to strike. Question was not when to do it, but how. Knew I wouldn't rush. Had enough resources to end this unpleasant matter in an instant, but wanted to act insidiously, so that the same scars would remain on their hearts as on mine. Frankly, I am among those people who prefer forgiveness and cutting off all ties rather than revenge. But my sense of justice at that moment succumbed to those emotions of shock. Could not control myself. Was like a monster. A version of myself that had only manifested itself a few times in my life. Did things with such passion only when I competed in football matches to show off in front of girls, and also when I was building my career, becoming the undisputed leader in our company. Plan was ripening within me, like long-awaited harvest that required time and effort. Wanted to do everything right? Every step was calculated to smallest detail. Blow had to be precise, crushing, and unexpected. Did not intend to create scandals or scenes, as people who give in to emotions do. My revenge had to be quiet, unnoticed, and most importantly, destructive for both of them. Emily and her lover continued their secret meetings. I pretended not to notice anything, sometimes even forced myself to smile when she talked about some everyday things, as if everything was in order. It hurt, but learned to live with the pain. She became my fuel. Every time felt like my emotions might get better of me. Reminded myself that this was just preparation for main action. Started small. My first goal was her money. Emily and I kept a joint budget, but she also had her own savings, which she did not talk about. Her hobbies and purchases had always seemed harmless to me, but now saw it differently. She was spending money on something I had no control over. Decided that I would start by blocking her access to money. Checked all our accounts, found that some of them were actually kept in her personal accounts, which I did not know about before. It was easy. Wasn't difficult for me to transfer money to another account and change passwords. Now she had no access to these funds, and this was just the beginning. Then began to work to destroy her reputation. Emily was always popular in our social circle because everyone respected her and took her into account. Knew that if I hit this, she would feel a real blow. Began spreading rumors through mutual friends, doing it subtly and unnoticed. Hinted at her infidelity, at her strange relationship with janitor. People I trusted couldn't help but pick up on these conversations. Soon, our circle began to become overgrown with gossip, which quietly destroyed her reputation. Emily didn't understand why people were starting to behave differently towards her. Why they were moving away from her? It tormented her, and I saw how she gradually lost confidence in herself. But that was just the beginning. Continued to watch them, planning my next move. Wanted to destroy his life too. Learned that janitor was going to open his own small business, namely a car wash. This was his dream, and he even tried to involve Emily in this project. She supported him, and I realized that their plan was to use her money to get started. But I already knew that she no longer had access to finance. Neither of them realized it yet, but their business idea was doomed to failure. Began to interfere in his plans quietly like an invisible force. Found out where he was going to rent premises. Through my connections, made sure that this lease fell through. He could not understand anything. His plans collapsed one after another, and I watched this with quiet, satisfied smile. He tried again and again, but each time he encountered obstacles that I put in front of him. At some point, he probably began to suspect that something was wrong, but he could not guess who was behind all these failures. Emily at this time became increasingly alienated. She didn't understand why her friends were starting to avoid her, why everything around her was falling apart. I saw her trying to regain control, but she couldn't. Our conversations became even colder than before. I was still playing role of indifferent husband, and it drove her crazy. I was no longer person she knew. I was something else. A predator preparing its final blow, but I was in no hurry. Knew that my revenge had to ripen to the end, so that they both felt its full power. Continued to observe, manipulate facts. Every new day brought me closer to final point. Emily still didn't understand that game had already begun, but I was ready. Soon they will both know what true destruction is. Continuing to develop my plan, my revenge became more and more thoughtful and sophisticated. Emily was falling further into the chaos I had created for her, without even realizing that it was all part of a carefully planned scheme. She was losing friends, losing control of her money. Her lover, the janitor, faced with the impossibility of realizing his business idea. But I felt that this was not enough. Knew I had to deal the final blow, so that they both couldn't recover from the consequences. Then one day, when I was completely immersed in my plans, something unexpected happened. The janitor, the very man who became the object of my revenge, suddenly came to me. It was a meeting that I could not have predicted. He approached me when I was returning home after work. His face expressed uncertainty and fear. Immediately realized that he knew or suspected something, but his next words surprised me more than I could have expected. He began to speak quietly, choosing his words carefully. At first, I thought he was going to admit that he cheated with Emily, but instead he told me something much more shocking. Turned out that she and Emily had an affair long before I came into her life, and this affair did not end. But this was not just a romance. The janitor, this unremarkable man, turned out to be the biological father of our eldest son, Jake. Hearing this, I was plunged into real shock, froze in place. These words pierced me like a knife. Couldn't believe what I heard. My son, the one I raised from birth, the one to whom I was an example and support, was not mine. All these years I lived in ignorance, not knowing that the man I despised was the father of my son. Tried to keep my cool, but there was a hurricane raging inside me. The janitor continued talking as if he wanted to explain everything that was happening. He admitted that he never wanted to leave Emily, that he wanted to be close to her and his son, but did not have the means and opportunities. He worked at a car wash when they first began their romance, and when Emily became pregnant, he was unable to take responsibility for her future. That's why she married me, a man with money and prospects, who could provide her with a stable life. He was just a shadow in her life, remaining on the periphery. I stood in front of him, trying to process everything he said. It wasn't just cheating. It was my whole life built on lies. And now I understood why Emily was always so protective of him, why she wouldn't let me fire him. He was part of her past, her present, and even our future, which I knew nothing about. But when he mentioned Jake, I felt a different kind of pain. Not anger or resentment, but deep disappointment. Jake, whom I raised as my own son, was a victim of these lies, just like me. He knew nothing about his true origin, and perhaps would never have known if not for this incident. How will he accept this truth? What should I do with this knowledge? The janitor continued to make excuses, saying that he loved Jake, that he always wanted to be near him but could not. He considered himself obligated to help us in the house in order to be closer to his son, although he had no right to do so. But I saw this only as cowardice and a failed attempt to make up for his own mistakes. It hurt me to think that Jake was caught up in this game. He was innocent of anything. I couldn't blame him for what happened before he was born. It was the fault of Emily and her lover, their mistakes and deceit that ruined our lives. Jake was a victim, just like me. Now I realized that I could not continue to consider him part of this lie. Thought about how to live now with this knowledge. But instead of hating Jake, I felt compassion for him. He, like me, was deceived. He grew up in a family where his real father was right in front of his eyes, but hid his face behind the mask of a servant. I couldn't let him continue to live this lie. Despite my shock, my revenge still concerned only two people, Emily and her lover. Jake shouldn't have to suffer because of their mistakes. I made the decision not to ruin his life. On the contrary, I decided that I would try to protect him from this terrifying discovery, at least for a while. He's too young to know the truth, and I didn't want his world to collapse the same way mine did. However, my determination to punish Emily only grew stronger. She not only took away my trust, but also my family as I knew it. She deprived Jake of the right to know the truth about his origins, and now she will have to answer for it. When the janitor left, I was left alone with my thoughts, knew that my revenge plan would be completed. But now I acted not only for myself, I acted for Jake's sake so that he would not be another victim of these lies. Emily had to pay for everything, and I was ready to take the final step. After talking with the janitor, my eyes were opened. Learned something that I could not find out even with the help of a detective. All the cards were in my hands, which meant that the moment had come for the last step. My revenge had to be completed. Now that I knew the truth about Jake, I couldn't take it anymore. My hatred for Emily deepened even more, but now it was accompanied by a clear understanding that everything I did was not just an act of retaliation. It was a fight to regain control of the life she had ruined with her deception. Every time I saw Jake, pain shot through me. He was innocent of anything, but I could not get rid of the thought that his existence was the result of that very betrayal, that I could not forgive. Tried to find a way to protect him from this truth, but knew that sooner or later he would have to find out. At that moment, it seemed to me that the only right thing to do was to bring things to an end with Emily and her lover, so that Jake would never know how he was drawn into this horror. Carefully considered every step, it seemed that Emily did not suspect anything. She continued to live her normal life, although her relationship with the janitor became more strained. Due to the problems I created for both of them, knew she felt trapped, but couldn't understand where this chaos was coming from. It was at this moment that I decided to act. Collected all the information I could find about her financial manipulations. She believed that her secrets remained hidden, but I found out that she was running her own shady dealings to hide money from me and from the IRS. This was my chance. Knew that if I uncovered her scheme, it would not only destroy her reputation, it would completely destroy her life. Started by contacting one of my longtime contacts in the financial sector. We developed a plan that would allow me to anonymously submit information about her fraud to the tax authorities. Did everything so that they could not connect me with this. It was supposed to be like an accidental disclosure of information, but with inevitable consequences for her. My actions led to an investigation, and Emily soon began receiving letters from the IRS. At first, she was in shock, not understanding how her so carefully hidden operations could become known. I watched her from the side like an animal driven into a cage. She couldn't do anything, and this was the beginning of the end for her. But this was not enough. Needed to deal the final blow to their relationship with the janitor. Knew that he had become dependent on her financially and emotionally. He made plans for the future with her, hoping for her money to implement his projects. But I had already deprived her of access to finance, and now I decided to act to completely destroy his hopes. Waited for the moment when they gathered for a meeting in one of the cafes where they often went. Knew that she would try to calm him down by talking about her plans, which were now in jeopardy. It was the perfect moment to strike. Contacted the manager of the cafe, who was familiar to me, and ensured that their meeting would not take place in an ordinary atmosphere. Instead of a private table, they found themselves the center of attention, surrounded by customers and employees, ready to hear whatever happened. When they sat down at the table, I remained unnoticed in the corner of the room, watching them. Their conversation was tense. Saw the janitor trying to find out what happened to the money she promised him for the business. Emily tried to justify herself, but her eyes betrayed fear. She knew the situation was out of her control and didn't understand how it happened. They argued, and their voices began to attract the attention of others. Then I decided to act. At the right moment, I went up to their table and threw a folder on it with copies of documents that pointed to her financial fraud. Emily looked at me in horror, realizing that I knew everything. The janitor, seeing the documents, was stunned. This was confirmation of her lies, and he realized that their relationship had never been built on honesty. He got up and left without saying a word. I watched as Emily was left alone at the table, her world collapsing at that moment. Everything she had been hiding was now revealed. She could no longer hide behind lies. Saw how her face turned pale, how she lost control. And at that moment, I felt satisfaction, because this moment was an irreparable blow for them. Now, all I had to worry about was protecting Jake from the consequences. He shouldn't have to suffer because of his mother's and this man's mistakes. Decided that I would be honest with him, but only when the time was right. Wanted him to grow up before facing this harsh truth. Emily was no longer the person I once built my life with. Now she was just a shadow of the past that I got rid of. And although my actions destroyed her world, knew that it was the only way to get my life back. Have I completed my revenge at this point? This is a controversial question, but my answer is no, because subsequent events continued to destroy the life Emily had built on her lies. After I dealt the final blow, Emily's life fell apart in an instant. Her fears, her carefully constructed world, everything disappeared overnight. She was no longer in our lives, but I am more than sure that our lives continued to revolve in her stupid head. She lost everything that was dear to her. Money, reputation, and most importantly, control over her life. Became an outcast in our environment. Lost the support that she had considered an integral part of for so long. In the end, even her lover left her, unable to accept the fact that she had deceived not only me, but also him. Watched all this with cold satisfaction. No emotions, only the understanding that justice has triumphed. Emily ruined our lives with her lies, and now she's paying for it. All I felt was a strange relief. As if a huge weight had been lifted from my shoulders. Was no longer a victim of her betrayal. Now she has become a victim of her own mistakes. However, after my revenge was completed, began to realize that the emptiness left behind was an inevitable result. Achieved everything I wanted. Destroyed her world, exposed her lies, took revenge for years of deception. But at the same time, I lost a part of myself. My life until now has been built on the thirst for revenge, on destroying everything that she hid for so long. Now that it was done, I was left alone, not only physically, but emotionally. Thought about Jake, and these thoughts tormented me the most. Now that it was all over, felt more and more responsible towards him. He was innocent of what happened. His mother betrayed him the same way she betrayed me, hiding the truth about his origins from him. But he didn't know this truth, and I understood that in the future, I would have to tell him everything. It was inevitable, but I still couldn't find the strength to do it. He was young, full of hope and ambition, and I didn't want to ruin his life like I had. Decided that I would bide my time, hoping that the moment when I would tell him the truth would come later, when he was ready. But every day it became more and more difficult for me. Every conversation we had reminded me that he lived in ignorance, that his life, like mine, was built on lies. Two feelings fought inside me, the desire to protect him and the fear of destroying everything he knew. Meanwhile, Emily tried to rebuild her life. Heard that she had left town, that she was trying to start over somewhere else. But for me, she no longer existed. Everything that happened between us is in the past. Felt neither pity nor anger, only emptiness and calm. It was her choice, and now she had to live with it. But a new stage has begun for me. Realized that revenge, although it brought me fleeting satisfaction, could not fill the void that was left by the destruction of our lives. Was no longer that person who sought control and success. All I wanted now was to find a way to rebuild my life. One day, sitting in my office and looking through work documents, suddenly realized that work no longer brought me joy. Everything that used to fill me with meaning now seemed like an empty routine. The career I had spent years building was no longer important. Perhaps this was the result of me devoting too much time to revenge. Or perhaps it was simply the result of soul-searching. Either way, knew I needed to change something. In search of a solution, began to devote more time to physical exercise and sports. Sports have always been an outlet for me, a way to take my mind off stress, and now it has become something more. Found solace in running and long walks. Not only did it help me stay fit, but it also cleared my mind. Began to feel better, both physically and emotionally. Change of scenery was the next step. Our home, which was the place of all my suffering, was now associated only with pain and betrayal. Couldn't live there anymore? In every corner, there were memories that I wanted to forget. So I made the decision to sell the house and start over somewhere else. Selling was not just a physical act, but a symbolic step towards liberation from the past. Moved to more modest housing, away from the social circle in which Emily and I lived. It gave me the opportunity to start with a clean slate. Focus on what really matters to me, and create a new environment free of pain and lies. But even after that, knew that my fight was not over yet. Jake remained the main question in my life. How can I deal with the truth I've learned, and how can I make sure it doesn't ruin his life? This was a question to which I did not yet know the answer. But I understood that sooner or later I would have to make a choice. After the move, life gradually began to improve. The new house became for me a symbol of a fresh start, without the ghosts of the past, without those painful memories that haunted me in the old house. But despite this, there was still an unresolved question inside me. Jake couldn't just forget about what happened. Time passed, but the truth remained a dark spot on my heart. Continued to avoid talking to him. Every time I saw him, was overcome with conflicting feelings. On the one hand, felt affection for him because I raised him as my son. But on the other hand, knew that he was not my biological child, and this knowledge was eating me up from the inside. Every time I tried to start a conversation about his origins, I froze. The fear of ruining his life was too great. Instead, tried to be a better father to him than I was before. We began to communicate more and spend time together more often. Saw ambition in him, a desire to succeed, and it filled me with pride. Jake was talented and driven. He reminded me of myself at his age. But every time I looked at him, wondered how long I could hide the truth. Knew that time was passing, and sooner or later I would have to talk to him. But for now I put off this moment, hoping that perhaps over time the truth would become less destructive. In the meantime, focused on my recovery. Continued to exercise, kept myself in good shape, and began to develop new skills. Realized that life has more to offer than just work and money. Began attending seminars and conferences where I shared my experience with young entrepreneurs. One such day, when I was at a conference, I met her. Her name was Kate. She was 10 years younger than me. An intelligent, confident woman who immediately attracted my attention. We started talking during one of the breaks, and I was amazed at how easy and natural our communication was. Kate was not like Emily. She was independent, ambitious, and had her own goals and dreams. I liked it. In her eyes, I saw not only interest, but also sincere respect for me. We started dating. At first, it was just friendly meetings, discussing work and life. But over time, our relationship became deeper. Kate was the person who helped me understand that my past should not determine my future. She didn't know my whole story, and I wasn't ready to share all the details with her. But I felt that with her, I could start a new life. With Kate, I felt like I could be happy again. She did not demand explanations or reports from me, did not try to control me. For the first time in a long time, I could be myself without feeling the weight of deception and betrayal. Our relationship developed slowly but surely. I was in no hurry, didn't want to repeat the mistakes of the past. We spent a lot of time together, traveled, and enjoyed moments that did not require sacrifice from anyone. But despite the fact that I felt a zest for life again, the thought of Jake did not leave me. Every day I realized that I could not hide the truth from him indefinitely. Knew it would ruin our relationship, but continuing to live a lie was wrong. Had to make a choice. Either tell him everything, risking losing his trust, or continue to keep the secret, which could ultimately lead to even more devastating consequences. One evening after dinner, I decided it was time to talk to him. We sat on the terrace of my new house, and the warm evening air filled the space around us. Jake was in a good mood, talking about his plans for the future, about how he was going to open his own business. He was so confident and inspired that I momentarily doubted my decision. But I knew it had to be done. When he fell silent, I took a deep breath and collected my thoughts. Began to speak, choosing my words slowly and carefully. Told him about how I found out the truth about his real father. Saw his face change as I continued speaking. First bewilderment appeared in his eyes, then anger, and then pain. This was exactly what I was so afraid of. When I finished, there was a long silence. Jake sat in silence, processing what he had just heard. Didn't know what he would say, but I was ready for anything. Expected him to explode, that he would blame me, that he would leave. But instead, he just stood up, looked at me with pain in his eyes, and asked why I had hidden it for so long. His words pierced me to the core. Realized that maybe if I had told him earlier, things would have been different. But now it was too late to change anything. Jake left, and I was left sitting alone on the terrace, realizing that this conversation had changed everything. After I told Jake the truth, an insurmountable distance was established between us. He no longer called or wrote, avoided meetings, and completely immersed himself in his life. This breakup was painful, but I understood that he should have had time to realize and digest everything. I had been living a lie for too long, and perhaps he felt that he, too, had been drawn into that lie, not of his own free will. Expected him to return one day, that we could talk again when his emotions subsided. But every day that passed without his call reminded me of what I had lost. There was an emptiness inside me, and I knew that this was the result of my choice. I had waited so long to tell the truth that when I finally decided, it broke us both. But I couldn't blame myself for it entirely. It all started with Emily and her lies, and I just found myself in the center of this whirlpool. My relationship with Kate continued to grow, but I couldn't fully enjoy the happiness she brought into my life. Her support was important to me, but I didn't want to drag her into the pain I was going through. She noticed my worries, but did not put pressure on me, giving me space to think. I saw understanding in her eyes, and it helped me not to drown in my thoughts. Knew that it was no longer possible to continue as before. At some point, I decided that it was time to take another step forward to leave the past behind. Realized that life was not over, that I still had time to make things right and maybe even restore my relationship with Jake. It wouldn't be quick or easy, but I was willing to try. Decided to focus on my business. Work has always helped me distract myself and find solutions in difficult moments. My company continued to grow, and I realized that I needed to invest in it with new energy. Began to spend more time working on new projects, inspired by the fact that each new success could be a step towards rebuilding my life. But this was only a temporary solution. The real problem was that without Jake, I couldn't find inner peace. Tried to call him several times, but he didn't answer. Wrote him messages asking for a meeting, but there were no replies. It was tearing me apart. My own blood, my son, whom I raised, was now so far away from me, and I did not know how to return him. Several months passed, and one evening I heard a knock on the door. It was Jake. I opened the door and froze when I saw him on the threshold. He looked different, more mature, decisive. There was still pain in his eyes, but not as much as when I told him the truth. He entered the house and sat down at the table, clearly ready for the conversation that I had been waiting for so long. I sat down opposite him, feeling the tension fill the room. He was silent for a long time, as if gathering his thoughts. And when he finally spoke, his voice was calm but firm. He was thinking about all this, so he kept wondering if I could have told him about this much earlier. I nodded, at a loss for words. He was right, and I knew it. He admitted that it was very difficult, and that he felt like his whole world had collapsed. Everything he believed in turned out to be a lie. However, he independently realized that, like him, I also found myself a victim of the situation and my mother's lies. His words pierced me. Expected accusations and anger, but instead I heard understanding. Jake realized what I couldn't admit for a long time. We were both victims of the same deception. He admitted that he did not know whether he could forgive her, and also sympathized with how fate had turned out, and what a disgusting woman his mother turned out to be. These words lifted a huge burden from me. I looked at him, knowing that this was the moment I had been waiting for since I told him the truth. We both suffered, but now we had a chance to start over, even if it wasn't the same as before. I saw understanding in his eyes, and this was the first step towards restoring our relationship. We talked for several hours. Jake told me how he dealt with this information, how he tried to understand what happened. I shared my experiences, talked about how hard it was for me to make the decision to tell him the truth. This conversation was an important step towards reconciliation for both of us. When he left, I felt that there was a new connection between us. It was no longer the same closeness between father and son, but it was something different, more honest and mature. Jake was still in the process of processing what had happened, but I knew we could now move forward together. After this conversation, I realized that life gives us chances to improve, even if it seems that everything is lost. The only important thing is not to lose faith and be ready to work on the relationship, even when it seems that it is destroyed forever. Since then, Jake has been a part of my life again. We started meeting more often, discussing his plans, his work. I felt like his father again, although now I knew that our relationship was based on something else. On truth, and not on the illusion in which I had lived all these years. Kate continued to stay by my side, supporting me through this difficult process. With her help and with my relationship with Jake restored, I began to feel like my life took on new meaning. I couldn't change the past, but now I knew I could create a future where the truth didn't have to be hidden. A lot has changed since that long conversation with Jake. We began to mend our relationship, and although the past left deep scars, I felt that we were moving in the right direction. Now there were no more lies between us. We both knew the truth, and that truth, although it hurt, became the basis for something new, stronger, and more honest. Kate also remained an important part of my life. Our relationship became deeper every day, and she became not just a support for me, but also a person with whom I could share my future. She understood that I had been through a lot and never tried to impose her expectations on me. With her, I felt like I could be myself without the fear of being betrayed again. My life gradually began to take on new meaning. I was no longer that person who lived for revenge. Began to appreciate simple moments, namely time spent with Jake, conversations with Kate, even my job, which I once considered only a source of stress. Now I saw that all this was part of my new life, the life that I was building anew. Continued to run my business, but now I have learned to find balance. Work was no longer my only goal. Found time for myself, for travel, for new experiences. Realized that life is not only about successes and achievements, but also about the people who are next to you, those who are truly important. One day, as I sat in my new office looking through reports, I suddenly realized that I was now truly happy. Not because everything was painless or that everything immediately became perfect, but because I experienced the pain, overcame it, and became stronger. I was no longer that person who was afraid of the truth. I accepted it, and it became my strength. My life would never be the same as before, but now I knew that I could cope with any difficulties. I saw a future in front of me that included Jake, Kate, and my work, but most importantly, there was freedom from the past. I was ready to continue living, not looking back, but building a new, honest, and fulfilling life. And in this new beginning, I found what I had been looking for a long time: peace with myself.